Perhaps this was one of history's darkest night. On January 2nd, 1492, the city gates of Granada opened and a king emerged. In his hands were the keys to the city, and in his eyes were tears. Tears for losing a centuries-old empire. He handed the keys over to the enemy, and with that gesture, it wasn't just a government that ended. A funeral of an entire civilization had just taken place. Muslims ruled Spain for almost 800 years. Yes, 800 years. Yet today, almost no openly Muslim community remains whose identity can be directly traced to that era. How is it possible for an entire nation of millions to simply disappear? Were they killed, or were they forced to change their religion? Today, we are unveiling Islamic history's greatest secret, reaching down to a single piece of hidden paper that emerged 3 centuries later and made the entire Muslim world weep. The year was 711. Europe was trapped in its dark ages when a stranger arrived at the gates of modern-day Spain. A young commander named Tariq bin Ziyad crossed the sea from the coast of Africa with an army of only 12,000 men. Awaiting him on home ground was the Gothic king Roderick, backed by an army estimated to be nearly 100,000 strong. Tariq bin Ziyad was well aware of the impossible odds. It is why he made a decision that perhaps no one else in military history has ever dared. He ordered his own ships to be set on fire. As his soldiers watched the vessels turn to ash, Tariq delivered a speech that remains a masterpiece of Arabic literature. "O people, where is the escape? The sea is behind you and the enemy is in front of you. Now there are only 2 paths, either victory or martyrdom." Tariq turned his soldiers into cornered tigers. On that day, 12,000 Muslims cut down an army many times their size. King Roderick was killed, and the door to Spain swung wide open. Tariq bin Ziyad didn't just bring a sword, he brought knowledge, civilization, and a new way of life. Within a few decades, they named this land Al-Andalus. At its peak, one city in Al-Andalus even left Baghdad and Damascus behind. People used to call it the ornament of the world, Córdoba. While medieval European kings struggled to write their own names, Córdoba was a city from another world. The streets were paved, and public lamps kept them illuminated at night. It boasted 700 public baths, free hospitals, and pioneering surgeons like Al-Zarawi performing complex operations. Above all, there was knowledge. The great library of Córdoba, which housed an astonishing 400,000 books. This golden age was built on the resilience of a single young man, Abd al-Rahman I, whom history calls Sakr Quraysh, meaning the Falcon of Quraysh. Following the bloody fall of the Umayyad dynasty in Damascus in the year 750, he fled alone and unarmed. Surviving a perilous trek across the deserts of Africa, he eventually reached the edge of the Islamic world in Spain. There, he and his successors established a government defined by La Convivencia, a historic era where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived together in peace and mutual tolerance. But empires follow a natural cycle. The light from Córdoba was not extinguished by an external storm, but by the hands of the Muslims themselves. By the 11th century, the unified state of Al-Andalus collapsed into fragmentation, splitting into 22 tiny competing kingdoms. This era became known as the reign of the Muluk al-Tawa'if, the party kings. These rulers sat in independent palaces, clinking glasses of wine, lost in poetry and music, oblivious to the threat gathering across their borders. Worse than their indulgence was their betrayal. At the Battle of Cabra in 1079, the Muslim state of Seville stood directly against the Muslim state of Granada. When short on troops, these party kings turned to northern Christian kingdoms for military aid. They emptied their treasuries to pay a tribute called pariahs, funding their own neighbors to destroy their Muslim rivals. The Christian king Alfonso VI of Castile openly mocked them, noting, "These Muslims are like gold mines for me. I will make them fight amongst themselves, take their money, and wait for them to get weak." The trap snapped shut in 1085. Seeing the Muslims hollowed out by their own infighting, Alfonso besieged the heavily fortified city of Toledo. No rival Muslim king came to help. They remained busy saving their own thrones. Toledo fell without a major war. It was the first nail in the coffin of Al-Andalus. In a state of panic, the desperate party kings begged the Almoravid leader in North Africa, Yusuf bin Tashfin, for intervention. When warned that Yusuf might take their kingdoms, the king of Seville famously replied, "It is better to herd camels for Yusuf in Africa than to herd swine in Castile." In 1086, Yusuf bin Tashfin crossed the sea and fought the decisive Battle of Zalaca, crushing Alfonso's heavy army and giving Al-Andalus a crucial second lease on life. But the moment the danger passed and Yusuf returned to Africa, the party kings reverted directly to their old ways, the same luxuries, the same conspiracies, and the same short-sighted betrayals. They forgot that the enemy was merely wounded, but not dead. One by one, over the next 2 centuries, each and every city fell. By the end, only a single candle remained burning in the darkness. Granada. Yet something doesn't add up. Muslims ruled Spain for nearly 800 years, and they ruled India for roughly the same period. But in both places, they were a ruling minority. In both places, power was eventually stripped from them. Yet today, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh are home to over 600 million Muslims. But in Spain, within a century of its fall, the Muslim identity was entirely erased. Why? The secret lies in the social roots. In the Indian subcontinent, Islam was not spread by the decrees of kings, but by the hearts of the masses through Sufi saints who adopted the local language, dress, and culture. Islam became an organic part of the soil. In Spain, however, integration never fully occurred. Rulers and the elite always viewed themselves as Arabs or Berbers, while the locals regarded them as Moors, outsiders. Furthermore, the enemy in Spain was not just a rival king, but the highly organized, ideologically unyielding Catholic Church. The confrontation was fought under a single uncompromising banner: one king, one state, one religion. There was simply no room for the other. Islam in Spain was a delicate plant in a magnificent flower pot, and the pot was about to be shattered. By 1491, the once vast empire had shrunk to a single city: Granada, the last refuge of Muslims in Spain. Outside its gates stood the joint forces of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Inside, starvation had taken hold. Within the walls of the Alhambra Palace, 2 mindsets clashed. Sultan Abu Abdullah urged surrender, believing resistance was futile. But Musa bin Abi Ghassan, the commander of Granada, stood up with a voice that shook the court. "Do not deceive yourselves. The enemy will keep no promise made to us. Right now, death is the least fearful thing. I fear the day when our children are forcibly made Christians, when bells ring in our mosques and our families are humiliated. For me, a grave is a better place than seeing Muslims disgraced." The Sultan and his ministers chose the illusion of safety over sacrifice. Silenced by their compliance, Musa picked up his sword, left the court alone, and rode straight into the enemy lines, choosing martyrdom over surrender. Honor had officially departed from Granada. On January 2, 1492, Abu Abdullah handed over the keys. As the Sultan rode into exile, he paused on a hilltop to look back at his lost paradise one final time, and wept. That spot is called El Suspiro del Moro, the Moor's last sigh. There, his own mother delivered history's sharpest rebuke: "Do not weep like a woman for an empire you could not defend like a man." The fall of Granada triggered an immediate shift in global power. Standing in that very court in January 1492 was Christopher Columbus. For 6 years, Spain had kept him waiting because its wealth was entirely consumed by the war against Granada. The moment the city fell, Queen Isabella used her newly won resources to sponsor his voyage. By October, he reached a new world, unlocking 2 continents of gold and silver for Europe. This immense wealth funded Europe's industrial revolution and gave them the geopolitical power to eventually colonize the globe. For the millions of Muslims left behind, the promises of religious freedom were a total deception. By 1499, millions of Arabic books on science, philosophy, and faith were gathered in the main square of Granada and burned to ash. By 1502, a royal decree forced all remaining Muslims to convert to Christianity or leave the country under pain of death. Those who stayed were labeled Moriscos. Spied on by the terrifying network of the Spanish Inquisition, they were executed or burned alive if they were caught speaking Arabic, washing on a Friday, or refusing to eat pork. For over a century, generations of Muslims lived a perilous double life. Christians on the outside, devout believers in the secrecy of their basements. In 1609, the final decree arrived, and the last 300,000 Moriscos were permanently expelled from Spain. The last trace of Islam was seemingly erased. But love does not die easily. In the year 1884, nearly 3 centuries after the expulsions, laborers repairing an old house in the Spanish village of Almanacid broke through a secret compartment hidden within a wall. Inside, they discovered handwritten copies of the Quran and a weathered piece of paper from the 17th century. It was written in Al-Jamiado, the Spanish language written secretly using Arabic script. On that paper was no record of property or treasure. It was a nasheed, a poem written in deep love and praise of the Prophet Muhammad. Think of the generations that had passed under the shadow of the Inquisition's sword. Their mosques had long been converted into churches, and their language was outlawed. Yet, in the pitch darkness of the night, mothers had still whispered to their children who their prophet was. Fathers on their deathbeds had still commanded their sons never to forget their faith. Books can be burned, mosques can be reduced to rubble, entire nations can be driven into exile. But belief can never be erased from the human heart.